So, Genlock, you've probably never heard about it until this video, and if you have, then you're probably one of those people which have watched your show and care not to really bother about its future, and if you're one of those people which are actively waiting for Season 2, well, welcome to the club. In this video, I'm pretty much going to be giving my opinions on the show, giving a quick overview about everything which happens in the season, and things I want the show to improve on, and talk about the show's possible future. So, sit back and enjoy the video, folks. So, when it comes to Genlock Season 1, the first episode came out in 2018 on December 22nd, with the rest of the show being on Rooster Teeth's website, Crunchyroll, and even HBO Max. And if you want to even be that cheap, you could just go on Dailymotion, with the first episode being pretty lackluster and the rest of the episodes being pretty good for the most part. Now, I guess in this episode, or just not in this episode, but in this video, I'm pretty much just going to be giving my opinions on the show and talking about the things which I liked and the things which I disliked. Because as much as I would like to talk about the show within its entirety and review the episodes, I would rather advise you just go on HBO Max or any of the other websites which I mentioned earlier to go watch the show just in order to get some context. But if you're willing to get spoiled on a couple of things, I guess I might as well just continue on with the video. Now, just in case if you have not watched the show, but instead have decided just to go watch this video instead, I guess I might as well just give the basics of everything which has happened in Season 1. So in Season 1, the good guys of the show are the Genlock team and the Vanguard. The Genlock team consisting of Chase, Yasmin, Cammy, Valentina, and Kazu, and the Vanguard just being the good guys of the show in general. While the bad guys of the show are pretty much Nemesis and the Union. Nemesis being another Holon, which are just the giant robots which are the stars of the show, and the Union being these guys, being these bad guys which use nanotechnology, spider tanks, and even drones, with the only human part about them being being the soldiers. But it's not like they're aliens or anything as far as we know. Throughout the show, the main good guys are the Genlock team fight against the Union until they bump into Nemesis. They fight Nemesis for a while, they get a bit of upgrades, Nemesis gets a bit of upgrades, and by the end of the show, what happens is that they end up going off on their own terms when it comes to how to fight the Union. So they pretty much just decide to go travel across the world in order to do that and try and do a variety of missions and stuff like that. So now that I'm done giving a basic overview or just the basics of the show, I might as well talk about the things which I liked and the things which I disliked. So when it comes to the things which I like throughout the show, it has to be the Holons or just the mechs themselves. And I know it's obvious coming from a show which is obviously going to have the giant robots as the stars aside from the main characters, but in all honesty, I just really like them. And yes, even though the designs in the beginning of the show may seem bland and uninspired, they eventually grew on me, and just the designs themselves are just really cool, or at least so in my opinion. I like how aside from their color palette, at least by the end of the season, they all have a distinct design which just screams a lot of personality into them. Even for the one which doesn't have a direct face or have eyes that can emote. It's just really cool in my opinion. And when it comes to what they could do by the end of the show, yes, in the beginning they could slide and shoot, but by the end of the show these things are flying, they're shooting lasers, they could go invisible and even have big shotguns and big swords. It's honestly really cool, and it really makes me wonder about what they could do if the Holons ever were to become something which were mass produced and weren't something which were just mainly used by the team. But now this is the part where I move into the music. So the second part I want to talk about, as I said earlier, is the music, and in my opinion, it's really good. Not only does it set the tone for the show, but in all honesty, it's just an absolute banger, especially when it comes to them and deciding to go use battle tapes as a base for half of the songs throughout the show. And not to downplay David Levy's work, but in all honesty, if it wasn't for the show, I honestly wouldn't have found half of my new music choice, and it's honestly hard to imagine this show without any of the music that's coming rather from David Levy or from battle tapes, as I mentioned earlier. So now to the final part, which is the action. And in my opinion, the action is pretty good, though if I were to criticize it, I think that there's a lack of weight when it comes to these giant robots fighting each other. Let me explain. See, it's one thing when a giant robot is fast and is kicking ass, in which there's no problem with that, right? But there is a bit of a problem when your giant robot lacks weight. Now, I feel like this is one small problem throughout the show. We're supposed to be convinced that these are giant robots brawling with other giant robots, such as the spider tanks which we see throughout the show, or even Nemesis. But throughout the show, there's a lack of weight to it, if you know what I mean. And this is something which I feel like every anime manages to do well, but Genlock kind of fails at. So if it could improve on that, that would be a bit better. But now, onto the negatives. Now, for one thing, I feel like the characters are honestly just not that good. And not because they're bad or anything, but because the writers put too much focus on Chase. Now, that's not to say that Chase is necessarily a bad character, because I feel like his character is kind of interesting and also kind of tragic in a way. But the problem is that I feel like they put too much focus on him, and because of that, they kind of failed at giving every other character a chance at growing, or just giving us a reason to give a damn about them. But of course, there is the exception of Cammy, which goes through a experience which is PTSD after getting her head ripped off, because just to remind you, another spoiler warning, I guess. Being in a Homon isn't like being in a normal mech suit. It is not just a robot that you jump into. In a way, it's like your second body. So having your head ripped off like that, in a way to where it seems like you're getting your head ripped off by another giant robot, is pretty terrifying. So throughout the show, you can see her having this form of inexperience and just being completely out of her own league. Because unlike everyone else, she doesn't have any form of military experience or anything like that. She's just a kid by the end of the day. But throughout the show, she gains a little bit more confidence and proves to be someone which can hold her own, and even does things which are important, like, I don't know, use overclocking or modding to her own advantage so she can be more effective at combat. But on top of that, she also decides to on top of that, she's also the one which goes out of her way to upgrade all the Homons, not only so they could fight better, but to match the personalities of everyone out of the team, even though they never asked, and it's honestly great. But she's the only character that feels like she goes through something, because I feel like the stuff that was going on with Chase wasn't really a character arc per se. It was just one little side story which just kept going on for longer than it needed to be, and it was honestly kind of shameful. I honestly thought that throughout the show, maybe there would be a bit of a conflict between characters like Yasmin and everyone else, because Yasmin used to work for the Union, and I don't know, the Union are the bad guys, and in episode 2 they nearly got killed by a spy, and it was revealed and stuff like that. So I honestly thought that maybe something important would happen to where everyone has a form of distrust for her, but Chase kind of has her back and stuff like that. So that could have maybe established a relationship early on. I thought that maybe there could have been something between Cammy and Kazu. And no, not in the romantic type of way, you sick people, but maybe in like the bigger brother and the little sister type of way. Considering the way how they both kind of interact and just kind of warm up to each other as, one that kind of as an older sibling, which is annoyed of everyone at first, but just kind of, tolerates them. I thought that would be interesting. And just stuff like that to where the characters actually grow together. And we see these moments which aren't just small and just in between the show, where we just have these giant action set pieces. And talking about set pieces, let's talk about the show's world, which is just not interesting but uninteresting. Now, when it comes to shows and, worlds, I feel like the most important thing about it, especially when it comes to a mecha show, is the world itself. Because if it isn't the characters, or if it isn't, the giant robots, which you're already interested in, it has to be the world itself, if you get what I mean. Look at something like Gundam, for example, especially considering the fact that that was kind of like a base for the show. The thing about that show, or about that series, or that franchise, is that there isn't just one timeline, there isn't just one world, there's like a bunch of them. There's a bunch of different settings which take place upon different eras and stuff like that. With each one, they manage to be more experimental and do something which is actually interesting. But the problem with Genlocks is that we don't know anything about it. We don't know about why the Union decided to go attack New York City in episode 1. We don't know why they're evil. We don't know why the Vanguard fights the fight when they could be doing something else. And hell, that's the main problem. The world itself, outside of every place where our main characters just talk, is just a set piece. And even when we're in the bad guys' territory, where it should probably be very intimidating because we should be against the odds, or the odds should be stacked against our main characters, it's nothing more than just, oh yeah, there's a couple spider tanks here, which is honestly kind of shameful. I thought that the show would be a bit more interesting when it came to that aspect, but it didn't really do anything, which is honestly a shame because now they're going to have to play all this catch up in season 2. And now I'm going to talk about the things which this show should improve on. Now, when it comes to what Genlock should definitely improve on, it has to be the following: the characters, the world building, the story, and the action. Now, I'm going to explain the action, but to start off with the characters, it's this. By the end of season 1, I barely cared about anyone else on the team. And not because they're bad, as I mentioned a million times, but because I felt like they were just heavily underdeveloped. And I just felt like they could have been better if the writers actually put them all to use. Now, I'm not saying have every single character have a character arc in the span of one episode to where we're constantly going back and forth between which character we should focus on, but but let it be something which goes on throughout the show to where there's a reason to where we care about everyone, if you get what I mean. Have these characters interacting, have them go through moments, have them go through something, so when something happens, we have a reason to care about them other than just going like, oh yeah, he's the one that pilots my favorite looking robot, so that's why I should care about him, because if he dies, then no more cool giant robot. So I'm pretty sure I got the point across there. Second of all, I feel like the world building should be better. The world in Genlock just felt very uninteresting and just boring by season 1, and mainly due to the fact that we barely were told anything about it. If we were, it was just, basic stuff like, oh no, the bad guys are taking over. How about you just show the bad guys actually being bad guys outside of your standard action scene? Because maybe then it can make things a lot more interesting. Look at something like Avatar, for example. The Fire Nation are constantly around, well, unless you want to talk about the episode where they're in the Earth Kingdom, but the point still stands. Constantly the Fire Nation is around and imposes some form of threat to our main characters. So maybe show our main characters trying to be in the world where the Union is taken over. And no, I don't want our main characters just to infiltrate or go into bad guy territory every once in a while. Have our characters go in some interesting places which make sense in the world of the story. So that way, when we're introduced to something like some type of secret lab which was hidden from the world, hey, maybe it makes sense, or maybe there's some explanation to it, if you know what I mean. And now, let's get on to the action. Now, I feel like when it comes to the action, it's good, but it needs some form of variety to it. Because yes, the spider tanks are cool to fight against along with the drones and the normal human people, but I feel like there's only so many times that you can fight against the same thing to the point where it just becomes boring. Like Ruby, for example. Oh no, guys, we're fighting against Grimm. The Grimm are back, guys. We should be so scared. The thing about Genlock is that there's a lot of possibility for us to have a lot of variety. Considering the fact that the Union are told up to be these guys which are big with technology, have us go against something that's interesting like a knockoff Jaeger from Pacific Rim or a knockoff Gundam. It can make it interesting and can raise the stakes if there was a proper setup. And speaking of proper setup, there's been this talk about the enemy Genlock team in the show which could possibly happen in later seasons. And in my opinion, I'm totally up for the idea. But it needs a proper setup, because throughout the show, Genlock's technology is built up to be this experimental thing which has only allowed certain people to use the holons or the giant mechs, so they don't end up dying horribly. But if it's something which is just magically fixed because of convenience and because we need to have mech fights, it's just gonna make everything that was in Season 1 kind of useless and redundant. So, In my opinion, as much as I was hard on this show, I'm going to be honest. I really want to see Genlock succeed where other Rooster Teeth shows have ended. Because in my opinion, I feel like the problem with most Rooster Teeth shows like Red vs. Blue or Ruby is this. They start off good conceptually, but as the show goes on, they just continue making worse and worse decisions. And on top of that, it only could just be so much, there's only so much that can be done to the point where the writers just sit there and they have to start throwing stuff at the wall just to see what sticks. And you have a bunch of stupid stuff like what's currently going on with Ruby, or just what happened with Red vs. Blue, to where at one point Red vs. Blue seemed like something which could possibly be a possibility in the world of Halo, to where, yeah, there's now gods and knives which can teleport and all this other bullshit which didn't need to be there in the first place. It is honestly just stupid. It's honestly just nonsensical and makes no sense, even though Halo itself can be pretty crazy. But the point is this: I want Genlock to succeed where other shows didn't, or are just currently failing. And if Genlock can manage to tell its story proficiently or just effectively, and also can manage to have some good action and character progression, I feel like it could succeed where other Rooster Teeth shows have failed. But that's all, folks. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and that's all. Lomos360 out, and I will see you in another video coming soon. Later!